Hi, this is Mark News from Plant Talk Radio. Thanks for subscribing and listening to our podcast, Your Gardening Questions from Plant Talk Radio. If you have a gardening question you'd like our host Fred Howard to answer, send him an email. The email address is fred@planttalkradio.com. Now for today's question. The fun part of the show is I get to listen to the two of you chat before we go on the air. And the funny thing is you guys were really upset about the way people plant things, yes. And This is a great time of year to plant trees. So why don't you talk a little bit about, Chris, the things that you see people do wrong and that you'd like to see corrected?
And we only have 1 hour, Mark.
Well, I'll cut you off when it's time to.
I'll say we can make lists and lists, but we were talking, and that's the one thing that. A lot of people call and are worried about their trees and the insects and the diseases, but a lot of times it goes back to how the tree was planted, especially those young trees. Mm-hmm. From homeowners to landscapers, we see a lot of times people doing it wrong. And probably the biggest thing is the depth of the planting. A lot of times people plant the trees too deep. They're thinking the deeper it's better, the tree won't fall over, or they just don't know. If you walk, I always use the adage, if you walk in the woods, take a look at the base of the trees. And what do you see? You'll see a beautiful flare. You'll see that trunk just flare out, and sometimes it'll be twice the size of the actual trunk. If you walk in the landscape and you look at your trees, you see telephone poles. And a lot of times that's just because it's too deep. You don't have that flare where it needs to be.
Yeah. And this has been studied by doctorate and postdoctorate people, and to a very significant extent, because it is a killer. And sometimes it doesn't kill, it maims. They, being the trees, don't ever take a hold quite right. Then we get a particularly wet spring, which adds to the lack of oxygen in the soil for the root systems because it's too deep and then too wet. And all of a sudden they keel over in the second, third, fourth year of having been planted, seemingly right. And people look around, what insect, what truck hit them? No, it was bad the day they went in the ground.
And a lot of times they'll see the insect then because the tree's stressed. But
right.
Trees die because typically a multitude of stresses. So once a tree's too deep, it's stressed, it can't recover, and then the insects come and finish it off.
Yeah. And the insects hear or smell or feel something that we can't, because they will fly from a cage in a mix of trees to the ones most severely damaged by too deep, too wet, too dry, whatever. They get a signal we can't even pick up. And that's how Mother Nature works, because, so to speak, if the tree's not going to do any good, we're going to turn it back into humus so the next batch can grow fairly well. It's most unfortunate because the average person, matter of fact, way beyond the average person, very few people understand depth of planting, width of roots. I have asked many a group that are, let's just say, plant-oriented citizens, how deep they think the roots of that great big oak are. And the oak might be 24, 30 inches in diameter. Oh, let's see. It's 40 feet tall. So they're down probably about 20, 25 feet. No.
Not at all. And that's always the problem.
Yeah.
It's construction and everything else you're doing around your house. You think you can till up that underneath your tree and plant your flowers, yep. And you're tilling up all those fibrous roots that are gonna basically be there for the tree, and the tree can't take up the nutrients and the water. And talking about the roots, Morton Arboretum up in Chicago, we did a research study up there, and they air spaded. So they actually blew away the soil of roots, and they traced these different roots from different sizes of trees and species of trees, and they measured to see how far out they went. And everybody says, before they did it, they're asking everybody, and they're like, oh, I bet it's to the canopy. 2.5 to 3 times the width of the canopy. So they had an oak tree that the width of that canopy from the trunk to the end of the canopy might have been 20, 30 feet. It was almost another 60 feet with those roots wet. Mm-hmm. So when you're out there and you're looking in your yard, roots of your trees might be in your neighbors or even a couple neighbors down.
Yeah, and sometimes it is a couple neighbors down, and then depending on the kind of tree, whether it's high-rooted or not, that can be a little bit of a neighborhood discussion.
Hey, thanks again for listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our other podcasts as well, the Plant of the Week podcast and the Plant Talk Radio podcast, all on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to sponsor a daily podcast, contact us at fred@planttalkradio.com. To find out more about Fred Hauer and Plant Talk Radio, visit our website, planttalkradio.com.
Circle270media.com